From the outside, our family looked functional enough. Sunday dinners, holiday photos, polite conversation around the table. But beneath the surface were fractures so fine and long-standing they'd become part of the foundation. I was 26 when everything finally snapped, and the truth about our family dynamics surfaced in the ugliest way possible. The signs had always been there. I had spent years playing the dependable son, stable, self-sufficient, always picking up the slack when others fell short. And somehow, that quiet consistency made me invisible. My accomplishments were met with silence, while my younger sister Brenda, the self-proclaimed princess of the family, basked in the glow of my father's constant praise. It didn't matter that I'd been on my own since 19, paid for my own college, built my credit, and managed a full-time career. Brenda, with her part-time boutique job and endless crises, was the one who deserved help. The dinner that night was my mother's birthday, just another family gathering on the calendar, or so I thought. But when Brenda casually mentioned she wanted a new convertible, and my father turned to me with that expectant nod, "You could help your sister out, right?" The years of quiet tolerance crumbled. I had already been paying half her rent for 2 years, without thanks or recognition. My refusal to fund a car turned into an explosive confrontation. My father's voice rose. He called me selfish. He accused me of turning my back on family after everything we've done for you. But what exactly had they done? I had supported myself. I had supported Brenda. I had become the family's invisible backbone. When I finally asked that question aloud, "What exactly have you done for me?" the facade shattered. My father yelled that Brenda had always been better than me. And in that moment, the betrayal wasn't just financial, it was emotional. He had said the quiet part out loud. That night, I walked away from that house, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. And for the first time in my life, I realized I had nothing left to lose, except the weight of carrying a family that had never once carried me. The night I walked away from my family, I didn't fully grasp how far my father would go to reassert control. I had stood up for myself for the first time, cut off the financial help I'd been offering my sister Brenda for years, told the truth about who had really been footing the bills, and walked out with a sense of clarity. But that clarity quickly turned into disbelief. 3 days later, I received a notice from the bank, repossession proceedings on my car. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I had bought the car myself at 19, paid it off by 23. The title was in my name. I had never missed a payment. But the bank assured me the paperwork was real. A title loan had been taken out against the car 6 months earlier, and it was now in default. Confused and furious, I demanded the documents. When they arrived, my heart sank. The loan was real, and the signature? It looked exactly like mine. The dates matched, the social security number was accurate, and everything had been signed as if I had personally walked into that office. But I hadn't. It was my father. He had forged my name, stolen my identity, and taken out a loan using the only asset I truly owned. And the worst part? He did it months before our argument, while still smiling at me during dinners, calling me son, and asking for just a little more help with Brenda. That betrayal hit harder than anything else. This wasn't a miscommunication. This wasn't a difference in values. This was fraud, criminal, and he'd done it without hesitation, expecting that I'd either never find out or would be too loyal to hold him accountable. I stood at a crossroads, press charges against my own father, or pay off a $7,000 loan I never took. I chose a third way. I sold the car, paid off the fraudulent loan, and used what was left to buy a cheaper vehicle. It wasn't just about money. It was about taking back control, severing one more tie he'd tried to bind me with. And it was the first concrete step toward reclaiming my life. Just when I thought I'd reclaim some peace, the next blow landed harder than I expected. 3 weeks after cutting ties and resolving the fraudulent car loan my father took out in my name, I discovered another betrayal. This time, it was the family savings account, the one I had been contributing to since my first part-time job at 16, the one we all agreed would serve as a safety net in case of emergencies. I logged in to check the balance, curious about what remained, only to find nearly every cent gone. Over $20,000 had been withdrawn in the past year, most of it aligning suspiciously with my sister Brenda's high-end shopping sprees and my father's failing business expenses. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just financial irresponsibility, it was theft, and from the people I had trusted most. I marched to the bank the next morning, heart pounding, and withdrew what was left, $7,853. It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine, and it was the last piece of control I had to take back. I closed the account on the spot. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was my father, furious. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he barked. I didn't flinch. "Taking what's mine before you steal the rest," I replied. He launched into a tirade about debts, collectors, family responsibilities. But all I heard was desperation masked as entitlement. "Not my problem anymore," I said, and hung up. Then came the final straw. 2 days later, I returned home from work to find my apartment broken into. My TV, laptop, even the watch my grandfather left me, gone. I knew immediately who did it. My father had used the spare key he accessed through my mother's emergency contact list. I filed a police report, and the stolen items were tracked to a local pawn shop. My father's signature was on the receipt. That was it. The boundary wasn't negotiable anymore. I hired a lawyer, gathered evidence, and threatened to press charges unless he returned every dollar and item he stole. He complied, begrudgingly, but it didn't matter. I wasn't seeking redemption. I was done. No more forgiveness, no more excuses, just freedom. The decision to go completely no contact didn't happen overnight. It wasn't a single explosive moment. It was a slow unraveling, the final thread snapping after years of quiet suffering. For most of my life, I believed the narrative my parents drilled into me. That family always comes first, that you forgive no matter what, that walking away makes you selfish. But after the theft, the lies, and the emotional manipulation, I had to ask myself a question I had never dared to before. Would I let anyone else in my life treat me this way? The answer came to me at 3 a.m., lying wide awake in my too quiet apartment, my stomach in knots. The answer was a resounding no. I wouldn't tolerate these behaviors from a friend, a coworker, or a stranger. So why had I spent years tolerating them from the people who were supposed to love me the most? That night marked a turning point. I changed the locks on my door, deleted the family group chat, and stopped responding to messages that only came when someone needed something. I got a new job in a new city. Fresh start, clean slate. It wasn't easy. The first holidays without them were hollow. My birthday passed with no call, no card, no reminder that I mattered. I would catch myself reaching for my phone to text Brenda about something funny I'd seen or to ask my mom how to make her Sunday roast, only to remember I wasn't doing that anymore. But with each day that passed, the noise faded. The anxiety I'd grown so used to began to lift. I started sleeping better, eating better, feeling better. I was no longer living under a cloud of guilt and obligation. I began making choices just for me. Weekend trips, investing in hobbies, spending my hard-earned money on things I actually wanted. Yes, the grief lingered. The sadness didn't vanish, but neither did the peace. And for the first time in my life, I realized I was free, not just from them, but from the version of myself who thought she had to earn love by being useful. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I just needed to heal, and I finally had space to do it. 3 weeks after the explosive dinner, I discovered something that shook me to my core. My father had forged my signature to take out a title loan on my car, a car I had paid off entirely by myself years ago. I remembered holding the keys with pride, knowing every mile, every dollar spent came from my own effort. Now that sense of ownership had been violated in the worst way. It started with a strange letter from the bank, a notice of repossession. Confused, I called them immediately. After being transferred from one representative to another, I finally spoke to someone who explained the situation. My name was on a $7,000 loan I had supposedly taken out 6 months prior. I hadn't. I had never even been in that bank. When I asked for the paperwork, they sent scanned copies of the loan documents. And there it was, my name, my social security number, my forged signature, eerily accurate. I stared at the screen in disbelief. My father had gone through my old school records or documents from home to copy my handwriting. He hadn't just lied to me, he had stolen my identity. I sat in my apartment for hours, feeling numb and violated. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was betrayal on a deeper level. This was someone who helped raise me, now forging my name to secure money for himself, likely to keep supporting Brenda and his failing business ventures. I had three choices: pay off the loan myself, lose the car I relied on for work and life, or press fraud charges against my own father. I chose a fourth. I sold the car, paid off the debt, and used the remaining cash to buy something cheaper, something truly mine. It was a downgrade, yes, but it was also symbolic. A clean break, a removal of the last physical tie my father had control over. That experience crystallized something painful but necessary. If my own father could violate my trust so easily, then keeping him in my life was no longer a choice. It was a threat to my stability. The emotional damage had long been done. Now the financial damage confirmed it. This relationship wasn't love. It was exploitation. A few days after I paid off the fraudulent car loan, I uncovered an even more devastating truth. My father had been secretly draining our shared family savings account. This was an account I had contributed to since I was 16, back when I got my first part-time job and was still naive enough to believe in shared responsibility and mutual respect. I had thought we were saving for emergencies, for family security, but instead, my father had turned it into his personal slush fund. Loan after loan, withdrawal after withdrawal, it became painfully clear that the money had been used not for the family, but for Brenda's shopping sprees and my father's failing business ideas. Designer handbags, high-end electronics, and risky investments, all funded by me, without my knowledge or consent. My name was still listed on the account, and that gave me one last shred of power. The very next morning, I marched into the bank and withdrew every last cent, $7,853. It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine. Mine to reclaim after years of manipulation and financial betrayal. I closed the account without hesitation. That afternoon, my phone rang. My father's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring twice before finally answering. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he barked, panic lacing his voice. "Taking what's mine before you steal the rest," I said, calm but firm. He exploded, yelling that I was ruining the family, that debt collectors were coming next week, that I had just doomed us all. But none of it moved me. For the first time, I saw clearly. This wasn't about family. It never had been. This was about control, about entitlement, about using me like a tool. I hung up, blocked his number, and that night I changed the locks on my apartment. It wasn't just about protecting my money anymore. It was about protecting my peace. I had spent years giving my time, my energy, my finances, under the illusion that family meant sacrifice. But what I learned in that moment was something far more powerful. Real love doesn't come with an invoice, and real family doesn't steal your future to save their own comfort. I thought I had cut the final thread when I blocked my father's number and closed the joint account. But I was wrong. 2 days later, I returned home to find my apartment door slightly ajar. My stomach dropped. I stepped inside cautiously, only to find that my television was gone. My laptop vanished. Even the watch my grandfather had gifted me before he passed had disappeared. It wasn't a break-in from a stranger. It was personal. And I knew, without a doubt, who had done it. My suspicions were confirmed when I checked with the building's management. My father had accessed the apartment using the spare key he'd taken years ago. One I had forgotten was still listed under my mother's name for emergencies. I called the police immediately. They took my statement and began their investigation. A few days later, they found my electronics in a pawn shop across town. The clerk even remembered my father and had the signed receipt to prove it. I was beyond heartbroken. This wasn't just theft. This was betrayal on a level I couldn't put into words. My own father had broken into my home and stolen from me like a stranger. There was no explanation, no excuse that could ever justify it. That same week, I hired a lawyer. I needed to protect myself legally, emotionally, and financially. I recorded a phone call where my father admitted to pawning my belongings, and I gave him an ultimatum. Repay every dollar he had stolen from me, or I'd press charges and make sure he faced consequences. He paid me back, every cent. But it wasn't redemption. It was a transaction. A cold, necessary exchange to put an end to the madness. And when that final dollar hit my account, I severed the last tie. No more contact, no more explanations, no more guilt. I didn't owe him anything. I had spent my whole life trying to earn his approval, trying to be the good son he never deserved. But now, for the first time, I realized something important. Walking away wasn't weakness, it was survival. And I finally chose myself. The decision to go completely no contact with my family didn't come overnight. It wasn't a dramatic outburst or a sudden impulse. It was the culmination of years of emotional exhaustion, financial betrayal, and heartbreak. I spent nights packing my apartment, hands shaking, not from fear, but from the weight of everything I was finally leaving behind. The voice in my head kept questioning me. What kind of person walks away from their own family? But then another voice, calmer and stronger, reminded me of all the times they had walked away from me, emotionally and morally, long before I physically left. I was raised on the belief that family bonds were sacred, unbreakable. That blood meant loyalty, and forgiveness was always owed, no matter how deep the cut. But what I had experienced wasn't love. It was manipulation dressed as tradition. Expectations wrapped in guilt. I realized that the only unbreakable bond had been the one chaining me to a lifetime of obligation I never agreed to. I wrote pros and cons, talked to an old therapist, laid it all out like a balance sheet. What I gave, what I got. It became painfully clear. I had been the only one investing in this relationship. Everyone else had just been withdrawing. The turning point came during a sleepless night when a question crystallized in my mind. Would I accept this treatment from anyone else? The answer was instant. No. So why was I letting it slide just because we shared DNA? I moved to a new apartment, switched jobs, changed my phone number. As far as my family was concerned, I vanished. But in truth, I didn't disappear. I finally arrived. In a life that was mine. A life where I wasn't the family ATM, the fixer, the invisible glue holding together people who wouldn't lift a finger for me. Cutting ties wasn't easy. It was grief mixed with relief. But I knew this. Healing couldn't begin until I removed the source of the pain. And I chose healing. The first few months of going no contact were brutal. Holidays arrived like storms, crashing into me with silence instead of celebration. Birthdays passed without calls or messages, and for the first time in my life, I had to redefine what family meant, not as a built-in obligation, but as a chosen connection. I'd find myself instinctively reaching for my phone to text my sister about a funny movie or call my mom when I cooked something she once made. But I'd stop short, reminded that they weren't a part of my life anymore, not because I didn't love them, but because I finally loved myself enough to set boundaries. There were moments I second-guessed everything. Nights when my apartment felt too quiet, the loneliness deafening. I'd wonder if I was being too harsh, too unforgiving. Was I really the selfish one like they said? But then I'd remember. The forged signature, the identity theft, the stolen savings, the years of being seen not as a person, but as a resource. And I'd breathe again, slowly, steadily, reminding myself that walking away wasn't cruelty, it was survival. In that silence, something new began to grow. Peace. Not the absence of noise kind, but the kind that settles in your bones when you no longer live in fear of the next guilt trip, the next financial demand, the next betrayal. I spent time with friends who checked on me, not because they needed something, but because they cared. I started rediscovering who I was when I wasn't being used, what I liked, where I wanted to go, how I wanted to live. It wasn't an instant transformation. Some days I still grieved what could have been, the family I wished I had. But over time, the grief softened, replaced by clarity. Choosing to protect my peace didn't make me cold-hearted, it made me whole. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to forgive and forget, but to remember clearly and walk away anyway. 3 years have passed since I walked away from my family. And with each passing day, the silence has become less of a burden and more of a sanctuary. I've rebuilt my life, brick by brick, in a space where respect is mutual and love doesn't come with strings attached. I've been promoted twice, moved into a new apartment with a view of the city skyline, and finally booked trips I used to only dream about. For the first time in years, I spend my money, time, and energy on things that nurture me, not on damage control for people who never saw my worth. The emotional residue is still there though. Sometimes it lingers in quiet moments, like when I see siblings laughing together or when I cook one of my mom's old recipes and wonder if she ever truly understood me. But I've made peace with the fact that some relationships, no matter how deep the roots, were never healthy to begin with. Blood may connect us, but it doesn't entitle anyone to drain you emotionally or financially. The letter from my mother was a turning point. Not because it fixed everything, but because it acknowledged the damage. For the first time, she didn't try to justify or deflect. She simply admitted what had gone wrong and expressed a willingness to change. That letter didn't erase the pain, but it gave me something I hadn't had in a long time: validation. Still, I didn't rush back. Healing isn't linear, and forgiveness isn't a light switch. I've learned that setting boundaries isn't about shutting people out. It's about letting the right ones in. And sometimes those right people aren't the ones who share your last name. They're the ones who see you, value you, and love you for who you are, not for what you can give. This journey hasn't been easy, but it's been necessary. Because in the end, choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's revolutionary. Life lesson from a family betrayal. Choosing yourself is not selfish, it's necessary. There comes a time when we must ask ourselves a simple but powerful question. Would I tolerate this behavior from anyone else? If the answer is no, then why do we excuse it just because it's coming from family? That's the heart of this story, a harsh but necessary reminder that blood may tie us together, but it doesn't grant anyone unlimited access to our time, our money, or our peace. One of the most important lessons from this story is that boundaries are not a betrayal. They're a form of self-respect. The protagonist spent years as the family's emotional and financial crutch, sacrificing personal dreams, well-being, and savings, all in the name of helping. But that help turned into entitlement. Love became conditional. And in the end, the only path to healing was separation. This story speaks directly to anyone who has ever felt like the responsible one. The fixer, the provider, the person others turn to not out of love, but out of expectation. It's a powerful reminder that love without respect isn't love at all. It's manipulation. It also teaches us that healing isn't always clean or comfortable. It's messy. It's layered. It involves grief, not just for the relationships lost, but for the version of ourselves we had to abandon to survive. Choosing to walk away from family toxicity doesn't make you heartless, it makes you brave. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is burn the bridge that's burning you. Perhaps the most hopeful message here is this: you get to choose your family. You get to choose people who see your value, who show up for you without expectations, who celebrate your boundaries instead of punishing you for them. That's not selfish. That's liberation. If you've ever found yourself questioning whether it's okay to put yourself first, this is your sign that it absolutely is. You are not an ATM. You are not a safety net. You are a human being who deserves love, respect, and reciprocity. If this message hit home, show your support by hitting the like button, sharing this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribing to our channel for more real-life confessions and life lessons. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be heard. And most of all, you deserve peace.